And I will go ahead and introduce Laurie Charles. Ms. Charles is an internationally certified forensic nurse who has seen thousands of patients impacted by violence in her 30-year nursing career. She began her nursing career in the emergency department and quickly moved into pediatric forensic nursing. She supervised an incredible team of passionate forensic nurses at the Children's Hospital of San Antonio in San Antonio, Texas for 16 years, where she was blessed to collaborate with fantastic child abuse pediatricians, forensic nurses, and other multidisciplinary team members to improve care and collaboration of children. 2016, she moved into her dream career as a forensic nurse, educator, and clinical assistant professor at Texas A&M University in the School of Nursing. Whoop! Center of Excellence of Forensic Nursing, CEFN. Ms. Charles teaches graduate forensic nursing courses as well as guest lecturing in undergraduate nursing and forensic science programs. Ms. Charles' passion is educating licensed healthcare professionals on the impact of violence on health across their lifespan, Together with her colleagues in the CEFN, she provides numerous continuing education courses for nurses and physicians on sexual assault across the lifespan, human trafficking, and the impact of interpersonal violence in pregnancy. Ms. Charles and her collaborator, Dr. Stacy Mitchell, created several innovative experimental learning simulations for health professionals, including adult sexual assault simulation, virtual reality simulation, and mock testimony. Ms. Charles served her profession by being a member of SIGMA and the International Association of Forensic Nurses, AFN, where she was the Texas chapter president in 2010, 2012, and 2014. She is a charter member of the Academy of Forensic Nursing, where she served as a member of the Human Trafficking Special Interest Group, SIG. She chairs the Pediatric SIG and was the secretary of the Education Committee, 2018 to 20. Ms. Charles is also a member of the Forensic Nursing Certification Board, who created and implemented 2 new forensic nursing certifications, General Forensic Nurse and Advanced Forensic Nurse. Ms. Charles chaired the advisory board tasked by the Texas Attorney General to update Texas Evidence Collection Protocol. The protocol guides care and treatment of person who experience or perpetuate sexual assault in Texas. She is also honored to serve her community as the incoming vice president and board of the Brazos Valley Sexual Assault Resource Center. That being said, welcome, Laurie Charles, and we're so glad to have you today. Let me get back to and you can go ahead and start anytime you're ready. Can't hear you. You're mute.
Better? Excellent. Sorry, everyone. I love seeing all the places that you are impacting. When I first came to Texas, I started my nursing career in Refugio. And then I moved from the small town of Refugio to the huge town of Beeville. And so all the places you're talking about, I'm like, I know exactly where all those places are. And I worked around there. So I am very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Jody. I really enjoy speaking about human trafficking. And the reason I enjoy speaking about human trafficking is patients have very graciously educated me on human trafficking when I did not know what I was doing, and they very kindly assisted me in my education so I can do a better job. I have a lot of slides, and so I wanted you to have the information. I'm not going to necessarily spend a lot of time on everyone, but let's get going. I'm not going to read the objectives because obviously, you know, we're going to talk about human trafficking and the impact on individuals. We're going to cover the laws, a little bit about terminology, talk about statistics and why it's a problem trying to understand statistics regarding human trafficking, and then a little bit about the trafficker profiles and how they recruit individuals, and then the vulnerability of people who traffickers target, and then kind of what is our response to people when we are concerned that they are experiencing trafficking. And so first off, human trafficking is a human rights violation. That's the most important thing. It is not appropriate. It is not okay. It is the buying and selling of human beings. And that obviously, that belittling and dehumanizing aspect of human trafficking is the biggest problem with human trafficking. When we talk about human trafficking, trafficking is a misnomer. People think because somebody is trafficked that they're moved from one place to another. That's actually not always true. Yes, it can be true. Like the movie Taken, Liam Neeson, and he's great. It's a good movie. That is not normal human trafficking that I've seen in my experience. It can include American citizens and those that are of foreign birth, but it absolutely does not require transporting of any kind. In San Antonio, when I worked there, what patients told us actually is they weren't even transported outside of 410 in San Antonio, which is the inner loop highway in San Antonio. And so that moving around happens, but that's not typical. So we're going to cover federal and state human trafficking laws. The federal laws, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, we call it TVPA. And this law was put into action to combat human trafficking and to ensure just and effective punishment of perpetrators and protect those who are being victimized. I host human trafficking conferences, and one of the conferences I had a speaker of somebody who experienced human trafficking. And when we asked, can you tell us how many of your buyers were arrested? She said 0. And we said, how many of your traffickers were arrested? And she went, 0. And I said, how many times were you arrested for prostitution? And she said 15. So we were criminalizing the wrong individuals. We were criminalizing somebody who was being victimized and didn't ask any questions about that in any way. And so what happened was she ended up in a sheriff's jail, and the sheriff was very passionate and walked through and said, why are you here? Why are you here in my jail today? And that day her life changed because she realized, wow, somebody actually could care about me, rather than thinking she was a waste of people's time and energy. And that helped her. She sees that as a pivotal point to her changing her life and her experience. And that, you know, that it's not a funny term, but snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. That actually occurred to her. She got her throat slit and she ended up in a ditch. And grace of all things, she was found and is now doing really, really well and helping other people. Before I get any further, I want to remind everybody that the most important thing we do is make sure that we're okay. And so I'm going to talk about situations that can be stressful and anxiety provoking. Please take care of you. Do what you need to do to make sure you're okay. If you need to shut your video off, you need to leave, do that. Do not think you need my permission or anybody else's permission to do that. If you ever feel like you would like to talk to somebody about this, please let me know. I'm more than happy to sit and debrief with anybody that wants to talk more. But I am going to talk about, you know, the enslavement and sexual assault and child abuse and labor trafficking of people. And so that could be a little stress provoking. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows, take care of you. You don't need my permission, but you have it. Take care of you. So when we talk about human trafficking and the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, it defines coercion, it defines commercial sex act, it defines debt bondage and involuntary servitude. And it talks about severe trafficking is things like sex trafficking of children. And then it really defines that human trafficking is a recruitment. So going out and recruiting individuals to traffic, harboring victims. If you know somebody brings a trafficked individual to you to keep, that counts as trafficking. Transportation, moving people from one place to another, providing care, a place to stay, whatever, or obtaining a person for labor, that is human trafficking, right? If you're not doing it following the appropriate laws in the United States. Another thing that TVPA did was required a trafficking in persons annual report. And I am so excited when this report comes out. It comes out every single year, and you get to look at not only how United States is responding to human trafficking, but other countries around the world. And they're given a grade like ABC. It's really interesting what impacts countries' position on the trafficking in person report, because Haiti had earthquakes and then hurricanes, and it decimated the infrastructure, and that changed their country significantly. So if you don't have an infrastructure, how do you know where your children are? You literally don't know. That's a great place for traffickers to come in and take over and have power and control. And so the Department of State publishes this, and they talk about how do we improve the laws in this country? How do we hold traffickers accountable and also prevent trafficking? So when we're talking about Texas laws, Texas has some robust human trafficking laws. And what the trafficking law says is that you're trafficking another person if you have intent to engage them in forced labor or services, and or if you receive a benefit. So say I'm an Uber driver and this person, a trafficker, uses my service to transport the people that they are victimizing. If I get money from the buying and selling of human beings, I am also guilty of human trafficking and can be found guilty in a court of law. And so this actually happened in San Antonio. Right next door to the federal courthouse was a hotel where trafficking was occurring. And if you want to make a bunch of federal attorneys really, really, really upset, you traffic people right next door. And so they went after the hotel, they went after the manager, they went after the Uber drivers, the Lyft drivers, and they successfully prosecuted people. And so in Texas, we talk about trafficking of another person through force, fraud, or coercion. And I'm going to get into that later on. And so if you force somebody into prostitution, promoting prostitution, aggravated prostitution, compelling prostitution, these are the adult laws, then you can be found guilty of human trafficking in the state of Texas. When we're talking about children, because children cannot consent, in the state of Texas, you have to be 17 years old to consent to have sex, and children can't consent to have sex in the state of Texas. Trafficking of children is considered a higher level charge. And there's even a continuous trafficking charge. This is my favorite law. I know I'm odd that I have a favorite law, but I do. And the reason I have this favorite law is because if I were to traffic an individual, I can be found guilty and I can go to prison in Texas. But if I traffic that one person, say on January 1st and then on February 1st, that can be considered continuous. And that is a first-degree felony, and that's 25 to life. That's a big deal. And so, or if I traffic one person on January 1st and I traffic a completely different person on February 1st, that's considered continuous. That is a criminal enterprise, and Texas does not take that lightly. So based on the law, let's move into definitions now. So people can get smuggling and human trafficking confused, because in our minds, trafficking means we're transporting, we're moving people. That's actually what smuggling is. So smuggling is an agreement between two parties. So say I'm Canadian, say I wanted to come into United States illegally, I would pay somebody to bring me into the country. That is a crime of partnership. Me as somebody who wants to get into a country illegal, and then somebody who is going to help me get into that country illegally. That is considered human smuggling. Now, when we look at the media, they often confuse smuggling and trafficking. And so, there was a there've been two now, horrific situations in San Antonio where people were smuggled in the back of giant 18-wheelers. And many, many people have lost their lives because the driver left them in a parking lot in that sweltering heat, and many people passed away. And so that is smuggling. And that was portrayed on the news as human trafficking event. And my dad called from Canada to say, hey, did you see the big human trafficking event in Texas? So that opened it up for me to have a conversation. Well, actually, that's a smuggling event, Dad, not a human trafficking, but people who are involved in a crime, they are perfect people to victimize, because who are they going to tell? I'm paying you illegally to get me into a country. They are the perfect person to victimize all the way up into the United States. And then while they're in the United States also. So smuggling and trafficking can very oftentimes go hand in hand, because smugglers and traffickers know they're not going to talk, because they could be viewed as complicit in the crime. So when we talk about labor trafficking, I want to touch on that, because lots of news is out there about sex trafficking, but there's not much on labor trafficking. And we see a lot of labor trafficking. Consider our migrant workforce, and Victoria being a very rural, the Golden Crescent being very rural. There is a definite possibility for labor trafficking to be occurring, especially with a migrant workforce. So individuals who might not speak English, they might not understand the customs, the laws of the United States. They also are perfect people to victimize and enslave. And so things that we're seeing with labor trafficking are domestic servitude, like come to United States and you can work as a nanny. And then they live in the child's bedroom, and they don't even have their own bed. They might not even have their own drawer, and they're basically working 24 hours a day and not being paid appropriately. That is labor trafficking. I saw it in my favorite sushi restaurant in San Antonio, where they were shut down for quite some time because everybody that was working there did not have appropriate papers. And when the restaurant came back up, my friend said, let's go to eat sushi. And I said, no, like they traffic people. And the response was, well, but they have good sushi. I don't care. They're trafficking people. I don't care. And so we can see labor trafficking in all different kinds of industries, but just be cognizant of that. When you see somebody who is on the street corner peddling, consider that they might be trafficked, and they have a certain amount of money that they must make every day. And if they don't make it in either labor trafficking or being bought and sold for sex, they might end up peddling on the street to make that money, because if they don't make a certain amount of money, they can be hurt. So debt bondage, this is where, that people being victimized don't necessarily understand what is happening, because the traffickers change the goal every day. And they might say, okay, we're going to bring you into the United States illegally. And then they get there and go, you know what? It costs a whole lot more money to bring you than we thought it was. So you owe me. And then it's like, well, I'm covering your food and shelter. You owe me more. And they're just never able to pay that debt. The work can be dangerous. It can be difficult. and consider work that other people might look at and go, I would choose not to do that kind of work. Though those kinds of jobs can be very hard to fill. And so the chance for human trafficking in those kinds of jobs can be high. All right, labor trafficking. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier. Repayment is oftentimes required. Like when I was talking about that nanny situation, we've seen that multiple times. There was actually a case where the nanny was very ill and kept asking for help, and her bosses did not get her health care. And she was finally able to get to the phone and call 911. And she had a life-threatening health crisis. And it had been ongoing for quite some time, and they just chose not to get her the health care she needed and deserved. When they started getting into it, they found out that she was in an involuntary servitude situation, and they went in and she was actually sleeping on the bed, on the floor of the child's bedroom, and she didn't even have her own drawer. So yeah, and they said they were paying money to her family back home, and they were not. So the biggest question where we're talking about like labor trafficking is, do you eat where you do you sleep where you work? That is a big one. Where do you sleep in comparison to where you work? Are you able to move around without getting anybody's consent to do that? We also need to consider child labor. Yes, it does happen. It just does happen more internationally in the United States, because in the United States we have pretty good child protection laws, but you can see it. So when we're talking about sex trafficking, this is the one most people consider, human trafficking. Sex trafficking can be adults performing sex acts through force, fraud, or coercion. So they're forced to do it, or they're coerced to do it, or they believe their traffickers' lies. Kids under 18 who engage in commercial sex are victims of sex trafficking, end of story. And so we can see this in the commercial sex industry, we can see it in pornography, and we see it in escort services. I had a patient tell me that porn is just sex trafficking with a camera. So we don't want to confuse consensual commercial sex. So say the person is 25 years old and they are having sex for money, say in Las Vegas. That is not considered illegal and is not a human rights violation, because they actually have the ability to consent. Now, if they were a child, that is human trafficking, done. If they are forced to do it, they are coerced to do it, and they are lied to do it, then that can be considered human trafficking. So I want to talk really quickly about force, fraud, or coercion. Force is this is the violence side of it. Use of physical force, drugging somebody, forcing them to take drugs to the point of now they can have substance use disorder. They have a need for that drug. That is force. Forced sex acts, we have seen multiple times with traffickers that they start as a Lothario. We have this, oh, we're in love with each other relationship, and then that quickly turns into forced sex acts as punishment, especially things like anal sex. That is, we see that as a significant punishment that can cause extreme shame in individuals who experience it. The next one is fraud. This is lying. We're just lying for whatever reason, lying about things like, if you don't do A, B, and C, I know lots of cop friends and they'll get you deported if they don't have their immigration paperwork. They lie about paying family back home, all those kinds of things. Abuse of power. So like law enforcement, using their power differential to force people into sex trafficking. We actually had San Antonio police officers successfully prosecuted of human trafficking in San Antonio on this. Coercion, this is the toughest one to prove, because it's the threats. It's that, well, if you don't do this, I will do this. And, you know, we had a trafficker in San Antonio who murdered somebody in front of, his words, his stable of women, that desensitizing, depersonalizing, dehumanizing another person. He called the women he trafficked his stable, and he murdered somebody in front of them. And he doesn't have to threaten them ever again, right? Like, they're terrified. They know exactly what can happen to them if they don't do exactly what he wants them to do. And so this coercion, while it's really difficult to prove in court, it is incredibly powerful. Perpetrators use it, and they're really good at it. And they control access to food or sleep. There's all kinds of studies that show, you know, when we are sleep deprived, we are not thinking clearly. Perpetrators know that. I want to switch gears really quickly and move into data. The problem with data is it's only as good as the information that's coming in, right? And, you know, it's not like there are very many people that like to talk about their substance use disorder and their lived experience related to that. Same thing with human trafficking. People don't necessarily want to talk about what happened for a multitude of reasons. But, you know, sometimes they're forced to do illegal things. They're forced to do things like, listen, if you don't want to, you know, be having sex for money, then find me somebody else. And if you find me enough people, then you won't have to. And so now they are complicit in the human trafficking because they're recruiting other people to traffic. And so they know they've committed crimes. And so they might not want to talk about those crimes. And it can be very, very difficult. When we look at the heat map of Polaris, which is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, look at Texas, and it's just glowing. There's a lot of human trafficking happening all over the world. United States, we're doing better at tracking it now with the Human Trafficking Hotline. When we go into the 2019 statistics, you know, COVID kind of impacted everything. Look at where Texas is. We're number 2 in human trafficking phone calls to the Human Trafficking Hotline, behind California only. We are ahead of New York and Florida, like, we're high. So in Texas, the statistics are very high. We're seeing reported sex trafficking more than we're seeing labor trafficking. And look at this, adults more than minors, and foreign citizens, but only slightly more than American citizens. And that is where people are like, oh, it's foreigners being brought into United States. Yes, that's happening, but it's also happening to American citizens. So traffickers prey on vulnerabilities. Think of the vulnerabilities in substance use disorder, and that is a huge vulnerability for human trafficking also. Perpetrators target and exploit other people. And they are criminals. They are criminals. Gangs, we're starting to see a lot of gangs because you can sell a gun maybe a couple times, but probably once. You can sell drugs once. You can sell a human being repeatedly as long as you feed and water them, right? And that is a very dehumanizing thought, but that's exactly how perpetrators think of people that they traffic. And so they can resell that person hundreds and hundreds of times. And so that's how perpetrators look at it. The way they recruit others is they exploit vulnerabilities. You know, like, I go into a room and I find 5 people. What person am I going to target? And the person I'm going to target is the one who needs something, whether they need love, safety, security, something. I'm going to find that hole and I'm going to fill that for them initially, right? And they promise things like a better life, a high-paying job, you can travel all over the world. And then they hook them, quote unquote, and then that's when the trafficking starts. And so the vulnerability of those who are victimized, they come from all different walks of life, all different gender identities, races, religions, nationalities, but people who are at really high risk are minors, children. And one of the reasons is their brain is not fully developed. And so their frontal lobe development, they might not be able to assess the lethality risk of the situation that they're in, right? And minors can be, teenagers especially, can be risk takers. But kids with a CPS history are even higher risk. People who are fleeing war and natural disasters, of course, they're at high risk, right? They don't have a safe place to go. People with legal vulnerabilities, including people who are in the country and don't have their immigration paperwork appropriately together, can be at very high risk. LGBTQ individuals, people who are pushed out, shoved out of their home for being who they are at very high risk for other people exploiting those vulnerability. And then of course, BIPOC individuals are also high risk. So imagine if there was somebody who's BIPOC who identifies LGBTQ and is fleeing a war-torn country. The risk is immense for them to be trafficked. So the same risk that people who experience adverse childhood experiences, those risks put people at risk for human trafficking. So if there's a unstable environment at home, somebody has substance use disorder, whether it's the person being potentially being trafficked or family members, that puts them at high risk. And then extreme poverty puts people at risk for human trafficking. When we talk to survivors, that's where I get the meat of my information, is from people who've actually lived this experience. So Letter and Wetzel in 2014, it's a very small N on this research project, but what they found was survivors are experiencing immense levels of violence every day. 81% were sexually assaulted while they were being trafficked. And 68% were experienced unprotected sex. So not only were they, sexually assaulted, but they also now are at risk for pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. They were beaten. They were threatened with a weapon. They were strangled. Half of them were strangled. That is a life-threatening event. And substance use in sex trafficking, 84%. So when I see patients, what I assume is they are coming into me incredibly injured, emotionally, physically, spiritually, psychologically. They probably have some substances on board, so they might not be able to comprehend everything I'm doing and saying. And so we have to consider that when we're taking care of individuals who've experienced human trafficking. Survivors report that they came in contact with healthcare professionals while they were being trafficked and that they weren't helped. And that crushes my soul. It just does, because we had an opportunity to recognize human trafficking was happening and we completely missed it. So we're in a very unique position to identify and provide support. And so the things we can look for are other people holding their ID or other people speaking for them. The third party is always there. They could have multiple injuries. They could be malnourished. They could have tattoos or brands. So I'm like, tell me about your tattoos. Let me know about that. And I don't lie and say, wow, that's beautiful tattoo. I just say, tell me about your tattoo. You have a tattoo. Tell me about it. In my experience, I've noticed that I have patients who have tattoos, and then when they're bought and sold to a different pimp, different trafficker, they will oftentimes burn over top of that tattoo. So it's a sign of ownership. I ask people, have you ever had sex for money or for shelter or for safety? That is a huge red flag for human trafficking. And if they describe sex with multiple partners over a few days, or they describe sleeping where they work. So those two questions in blue, those are really important, and they can really get to the heart of the matter of maybe this person is being trafficked. So when we look at a person who's being trafficked, they can be hypervigilant, but they can have scattered mental focus. How on earth is the person supposed to sit here with me and tell me what happened to them when they've been strangled, they've been beaten, they've been threatened, there was a weapon? How? And they potentially have some drugs on board. Who knows what those drugs are? How are they supposed to be there and be present with me? What I can do as a healthcare provider is the patient has autonomy. They run the show. And while I understand that if they leave the hospital, I might never see them again, it is more important that they have autonomy, because it's always taken away from them repeatedly. It's actually expected that I will take away their autonomy. And when I don't, that builds rapport, and they respect me more. And maybe the next time they come in to see me will be the time that they are in a space to accept help from me. So trauma-informed care, it takes time. It takes time to build that rapport. And they might not be able to tell me in a chronological way. It might take a really long time, because, you know, with sexual assault, a one-time incident, just that alone can be incredibly difficult for a patient to talk about. But then to experience that, you know, 7 times a day, how on earth are they supposed to put that in a way that I can comprehend? And so what really helps is sleep. Sleep really helps with that hormone flood. And so it helps our brain come back and reset, but it can take several sleep cycles. And if they are hypervigilant and anxious and stressed, they might not get good sleep, that good healing, deep sleep. It might take longer. So interventions, this is the heart of the matter. Person first language choices, inclusive language choices, and empowering the person that they run the show. They run the show. And I need to build rapport. As a healthcare professional, I'm going to do presumptive treatment for sexually transmitted infections. And I'm going to know that people might not tell me everything the first time they talk to me. And that might be related to my inability to create a safe space for them to talk. But it can also be related to they've experienced so much trauma. It is so complex and it's compounded that they just can't even think of all the things that happened. So we're going to do mandatory reporting always as needed. It's always great to call the human trafficking hotline too, so they can track information. There are fantastic community resources available. Check in your community. I did put some Texas resources here. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, they're great. The Texas Human Trafficking Prevention Coordinating Council, and then the Human Trafficking Resource Center is on here. The governor has a great child sex trafficking team. If you are looking to set up a human trafficking team in your community, Unbound offers advocacy accompaniment. So they will meet people who are experiencing trafficking where they are, and they will be with them and advocate for them. People who are experiencing trafficking can have immense legal needs. And so Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid is absolutely incredible. The Institute to Combat Trafficking is one of my favorite organizations. It's not just because it's run by a dear friend of mine, Kirsten Melton, who is a former human trafficking prosecutor out of San Antonio. But she started this, and what this company does is it actually helps prosecutors. So say you're in Little Town, Texas, and you have a human trafficking situation. How the heck do you prosecute that if you've never done it before? Well, you reach out to the Institute, and they are experienced human trafficking prosecutors, and they help build that case and help the evidence. There's other human trafficking organizations. I don't know that I have enough time to talk about SANE-A, do I?
We usually wrap up at 1, just because we
Okay.
kind of go over a lunch break, and
That's
I'm
okay.
sure people have questions for you too, Laurie.
That's what I was gonna say, is like, let's get into, here's my contact information, reach out to me anytime. And then all the references, and I want to stop sharing. I know I spoke really, really, really fast, but I wanted you to have the information. So please let me know what I can do to help you. Do you have any questions about what to do or anything along those lines?
Laurie, thank you so much for your presentation. It's so good seeing you again. It's always a pleasure. And I want to say thank you for everything you do and you continue to do.
Thank you, Patty. That makes me happy. Please partner with your community agencies, you know, the Sexual Assault Resource Center, right? If it's sex trafficking, that is, you need to reach out to your rape crisis center in town. I mean, that's what it is. It's multiple incidences of sexual assault. And so they are very well versed at helping people who've experienced sexual violence.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Charles, that incident that you spoke of that happened recently, most recently, was in San Antonio. Most people might have forgotten the big one that happened here in Victoria, Texas in 2009. They dropped a tractor trailer of over 50 people. The driver got spooked and left, and they were in that container baked in the sun for days and days, and they opened it up and it wasn't pretty. So
Yeah.
struggle's real, and we always talk about the Golden Crescent or Crossroads here being the Highway 77 that comes out of McAllen and Highway 59 that come out of Laredo, and they cross through here, and guns and money and human trafficking go north, and the money goes south. Drugs and trafficking go north, and guns and money go south. So it's a struggle all the time down here.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. Please let me know if there's anything I can do in any way to support everyone. I'm putting my email in the chat so you can have it. And Charles is going to share the presentation. I know I went through quickly, but I wanted y'all to have the information. We have continuing education through our Center of Excellence in Forensic Nursing also, if you're interested.
Awesome job,
And
Laurie. Charles.
yes, and spoiler alert, you're going to be visiting the area in August, I think. So
Yes.
So okay.
Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day, and happy St. Patty's Day.
Thank you,
you.
Laurie.
Take care.